Hey everyone, welcome to my journey to the Bible. This is already episode 3, if you can believe that. Tonight I want to talk about, can I trust God? It's an important question, and I think all of us have asked that question to ourselves or to someone else once or twice. Hey, if you've been with us since the beginning, can I just say thanks and welcome back? And if it's the first time you've joined us, then I want to take just a second, and you might be asking, well, what is this whole video series about? Well, it's really just simple conversations about what God has been teaching me on my own personal journey. For example, in the first episode, we talked about those lies that we can believe sometimes as Christians. You know, Satan would have us believe that we're not good enough, or that God can use them, but he could never use someone like me. And those are just lies. And then in episode 2, we talked about those incredible promises that God offers us in the Bible. You know, I will never leave you or forsake you in Hebrews, or in Romans he talks about all things work out for good for those who love the Lord. Now, obviously I'm not giving you the full Bible verse on that, but if you want to learn more about those lies or those promises, then go on back and watch episode 1 and episode 2, and I hope you enjoy them. But tonight I want to talk about trusting God. And if I'm honest, it's probably one of the greatest struggles of my life, was learning how to trust God. But before I get started, real quick, can I just say this? If these conversations have encouraged you or helped you in any way in your relationship with Jesus, if you would just hit that like button, or maybe even subscribe to the channel, that would be helping me out a lot, and I appreciate it. Because, you know, my hope is that together we can keep learning, keep growing, and keep discovering who Jesus really is, right? Now, I need to ask you a question. Have you ever wondered how trusting God just seems to come so easy to some people? And then you've got the other people, like myself, that it's probably one of the hardest things that we've ever been asked to do. Well, I wondered about that. In fact, I wondered a lot about that. And so I think I discovered something as I was going through the Bible and trying to read up on this. I think maybe the reason a lot of us struggle to trust God has very little to do with God, and maybe it has everything to do with people we learned to trust before we knew God, right? And I think that's where I want to start my story tonight. This is just kind of I hope it gives you a better idea why I struggle to trust God sometimes. This is just something that happened when I was 7 years old, right? It was supposed to be one of those days, right, where you get together with family, and it should have been a great childhood memory. We were going to my aunt and uncle's house. They lived in LA. I was raised in California, and every once in a while we'd go up and hang out with my cousins. So they were boys, just like I was. I'm a boy. But my cousins were going to be there, and we'd always get together. We'd build some of the craziest forts. We'd play army. We would just simply swing sticks around sometimes, pretending they were swords. And maybe we would discover hidden treasure somehow in the yard. It was the 60s. We didn't have phones. We didn't have video games. We didn't have YouTube. We had our imaginations, and we let them run wild, trust me. You know, dirt piles became castles, and a cardboard box, a simple cardboard box, becomes a great race car, a really fast race car. And, you know, a stick, it could become just about anything you wanted it to. Well, it should have been one of those memories that still makes me smile. Instead, it's one I'll never forget for a completely different reason. Not long after we got to my aunt and uncle's house that day, my stepdad started drinking. He was a drinker. I grew up in a home of alcoholics, and this was one of the days that when we got there, he started drinking, and he was just drinking one beer, and then another beer, and then another beer. Now, I was 7. I didn't understand a lot about alcohol back then, but I understood enough to know this, that he was the one driving us home. And I'm watching him slam all these beers. And I remember watching him all afternoon. Now, it wasn't because I wanted to watch him. It was just because I was scared. And I thought to myself, he's driving us home. Well, each drink made him louder. And then his laugh would change, and then he would slur his words, and his balance would be off, and he would be stumbling all over the place. And every time he would reach for a beer, I'll never forget it, my stomach, it would just tighten. You know when you're scared and you get that, I don't know how to explain it, it's just a tightening in your stomach. And I remember looking around at all the adults, right? And here's my aunt and my uncle and everyone else, and they're laughing and they're talking and they're having a great time. And I kept waiting for somebody, anybody, to say something to him. Surely someone was going to take his keys from him. They weren't going to let him drive home, and they were going to say something like, "You've had enough." I thought to myself, somebody was going to look over at me and think that little guy shouldn't be going home with him in that car when he's that drunk. But nobody did. You know, what's always amazed me is I'm a 7-year-old little boy and I could see the danger here, but the adults couldn't. I still don't understand that. Or maybe they didn't, I think what I thought, maybe they just don't care, right? So anyway, it was time to leave. And I remember getting in that car and I was sitting in the front seat between my mom and my stepdad. And I remember it was this old, I think it was an old Falcon or something, no seat belts. And I remember sitting in the middle there, and I was a little guy, and I remember I always had this need to lean forward and look up over that dashboard so I could see, outside. And I kept scooting to the edge of the seat and leaning forward. I was trying to peek over the dash. I don't know, maybe as a 7-year-old I thought to myself, if I could just see what was coming, it would be better. I don't know. I don't know why that memory stuck so hard in my head, trying to lean forward and look out the car. Anyway, we hadn't been on the road very long. We had left my aunt and uncle's house and we haven't been driving very long. And all of a sudden, I don't know if you've ever heard cars when they crash, but it was a gut-wrenching sound. And I remember being thrown forward and my mom watching her be thrown forward. And he had hit a parked car. And I guess I was a little shocked, but I remember waiting for him to stop and get out and do what adults do, right? But that's not what he did. He just backed up and kept going. And he kept driving. And I remember thinking, and I looked at my mom and she was yelling, "Stop this car." And he's going faster and faster. And I just remember thinking, well, I don't remember thinking anything. I was just actually scared. But suddenly, that sound again, and that being thrown forward, he hit another car. Still, no stopping. And by now, I have a memory, and that is the car was full of smoke. He was a chain smoker, and he was smoking, and I could smell the alcohol, and I just wished somebody would have rolled down a window. I just wanted to breathe. I was scared, and I wanted to breathe. But he just kept driving. And I remember I kept trying to look over that dashboard to see what was coming next. I don't know where we were. I don't know what streets we were on. I don't know what streets we drove, but I just remember all of a sudden I saw flashing lights because it was dark now. It was getting dark, and I could see these flashing lights on the windshield and on the inside of the car, blue and red flashing lights. And I remember thinking, good, oh, finally. The police are here. He'll have to stop now. He can't keep going. Well, he did. He kept driving, and now the police were chasing us. And I remember hearing the sirens, and they were getting louder and louder. And the lights reflecting through the windshield, and this fear. I just remember this fear. And everything was happening so fast, I couldn't do anything. When you're 7 years old, you have zero control. The adults, they get to make the decisions, and the kids, well, we just get to live with it. I remember wishing it would stop. And then finally, another crash. This time it was harder. I don't know if I hit my head. I don't remember really anything after that initial crash and that sound. Oh my gosh, that sound. I just know that we were at the end of a dead-end street, and I know there was nowhere else for him to go. But then all of a sudden, all at once, these policemen were all around the car, guns drawn. They were yelling, screaming, and all of a sudden the doors flew open. And he got drug out this side, and my mom got drug out that side, and I was watching them get thrown to the ground and handcuffed. And honestly, I didn't know what to think. I remember watching them walk to separate police cars, and they put him in those police cars, and then all of a sudden, as quick as it started, it stopped. And it just got quiet, eerily quiet. The sirens had stopped, the yelling had stopped. The only thing that I remember still moving were those lights. All inside the car, red and blue lights, red and blue lights. And there I sat, all by myself. I was just sitting there, and I remember shaking. I was shaking, and I couldn't stop shaking. I remember that. It was, it's funny the things you remember, because I was shaking, and I remember these stupid vinyl seats. It was the middle of summer, and it was hot, and they were sticky. And I remember looking around, and I remember wondering if somebody was going to come back and get me. I didn't know if I should get out. I didn't know if I should stay there. I just sat there, shaking. I remember this thought. And I don't know why this comes back, but I remember thinking to myself, where am I going to sleep tonight? I knew they were taking them away, and I didn't know what was going to happen to me. And I remember I was sitting there shaking and trying so desperately not to cry. My dad would get so mad at me when I cried, and I thought, I can't cry. I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to cry. And then I saw him. He seemed like a huge policeman. He just seemed so big. I don't know why. Maybe I'm overthinking. Maybe I'm exaggerating how big he was. I don't know. I just remember this really big police officer. He wasn't running. He wasn't yelling. He just was walking slowly toward the car. And I never took my eye off him. And he opened the driver's door. He didn't yank it open. He just casually opened that door. And then he looked over at me and he smiled. I remember his smile. And it wasn't a big smile. It was just enough that told me it's going to be okay. And then he leaned in toward me and he just quietly said, "It's okay, buddy. I got you." And I couldn't move. Everything that happened that day, everything that I'd been holding inside, it was almost as if I were frozen. And he didn't rush me. He didn't grab me. He didn't yell for me to hurry. He just waited. And then he said it again. He said, "It's okay, buddy. I got you. Come on." So I finally reached out my hand and I started sliding across those stupid vinyl seats. I was in shorts and I remember my legs were sticking to those seats. And before my feet ever touched the ground, he just picked me up. And I wrapped my arms around his neck and buried my face in his shoulder. I remember that. And for the first time in that entire day, I felt safe. I've replayed that moment 1,000 times over the years. And it's not because I've enjoyed remembering, because I don't. It's because something happened in that little 7-year-old boy's heart that day. Something I didn't understand until I was much older, and it was that day I made a promise to myself, and I never said it out loud. I don't even know if I could have even put what I was thinking into words, but it went something like I was making a decision that nobody was ever going to make me feel this helpless again. A little boy, I don't know if I could feel that. I knew that I was telling myself, I'll take care of myself. I'll stay in control. I'll never put my life in someone else's hands. Here's the problem with that. That little promise followed me into adulthood, and then it followed me into my marriage, and then it followed me into my work. followed me into my relationship with God. Because years later, people would say things like, just trust God. And every time I heard those words, something inside of me, it pushed back. Not because I didn't believe in God, but because I never really learned what trust looked like. Look, if the people I could see, the people that were supposed to love me, couldn't be trusted, and you're asking me to trust a God that I can't even see, how was I supposed to do that? But I look back now, and I think I didn't realize, I should say, how much that one day shaped my life. It wasn't just a bad afternoon. It became the lens through which I looked at people. It taught me something that wasn't true, but it felt true. It felt true. If you want to be safe, just depend on yourself. Don't let people get too close, and don't give people control. Don't trust. The problem was, like I said, I carried that thinking into my relationship with God. And while I believe he existed, and I believe Jesus died on the cross for my sins, and I believe he loved me, trusting him, that was different. Because trust means giving somebody something they can hurt. It means giving up control. Look, if you've spent your whole life trying to stay in control, that's terrifying. But maybe that's what Proverbs 3:5, why it's always fascinated me. Jesus says, the Bible says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. For years, I read that almost like God was saying, come on, Mike. Just trust me. But that's not what I see anymore. I don't hear an angry God anymore. I hear a loving Father. Since I started reading the Word, he's not demanding something from me at all. He's inviting me into something. You know what finally changed the way I looked at trust? I stopped asking the wrong question. I stopped saying, how can I trust God? And I started asking, why can I trust God? Those are two completely different questions. The first one puts all the pressure on me, but the second one causes me to look at him. And then I started asking, what is God really like? Not what I assume he's like, and not what someone else told me, but what does the Bible actually say? So I started reading it, and something amazing happened. Page after page, I met a God who kept his promises. Not sometimes, all the time. I met a God who was patient. He was patient with people that doubted him. Abraham doubted, Moses doubted, Gideon doubted, the disciples, they doubted. Thomas doubted, right? Where do we get doubting Thomas, right? In all my reading, not once did I ever find a place in the Bible where Jesus says, I'm done with you. Instead, what I found was he kept teaching them, kept loving them, kept proving himself faithful. And then I realized something. Trust isn't God, it's not something God demands of us before he reveals himself. Trust grows because he continually reveals who he is, right? Think about the disciples for a minute. Jesus didn't walk up to them and say, trust me for the rest of your life. He simply said, follow me. Day after day, meal after meal, conversation after conversation, miracle after miracle, they learned that they could trust him. And isn't that how relationships are supposed to work, really? Because trust isn't built in a moment, it's built in moments, plural. Thousands of them, a promise kept, a prayer answered, peace in the middle of a storm, strength you didn't have yesterday. He really was with me. And maybe that's why David wrote in Psalm 56, when I'm afraid, I put my trust in you. Notice he didn't say when I'm no longer afraid. He said when I'm afraid, he trusts him. when I'm afraid. Now I've learned something. Fear and trust can exist in the same heart. Because courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing who I'm going to believe while I'm afraid. I wish I could tell you that after I became a Christian, trusting God suddenly became easy. It did not. It didn't. There have been seasons when I've questioned him. There have been seasons when I didn't understand what he was doing. And seasons when I wanted answers and all I got was silence. But you know what I've discovered? Every time I kept walking with him, I eventually found this out. He was walking with me all along. Sometimes he calmed the storm. Sometimes he would just hold my hand through it. Either way, he never let go. And you know what? Here's something God showed me. Maybe that's what that police officer was teaching me without either one of us even realizing it. He didn't stand 20 feet away and yell, "Come on, kid, get over here." He didn't bark orders at me. He came to me. Isn't that amazing? He opened the door, he reached in his hand, and he waited. And when I finally reached for him, he carried me. I've thought about that a lot. Because that's exactly what Jesus has done for me, time after time after time. When I couldn't find the strength, he came to me. When I was afraid, he came to me. And when I didn't understand, he came to me. And maybe that's what he's doing for you today. Think about that. I've thought about that day thousands of times over the years. And looking back, I don't think the biggest thing that happened was the police chase. I think it was what happened inside a little 7-year-old boy. Without ever saying it out loud, I made a decision. I didn't know I was even making the decision. I couldn't have put it into words if I tried then, but somewhere deep inside, I decided I'll never let anyone have that kind of control over me again. I'll protect myself. And you know, there's been other experiences in my life that only reinforced what that little boy had already begun to believe. And we're going to talk about those in future episodes. But this is where I think it all began in this story. This is where the seeds of distrust were planted, I think. Years later, when people would casually say, "Just trust God," boy, I wanted to. I did. I wanted to trust God, but I didn't know how. Because before I ever met Jesus, life had already taught me that trusting someone can be dangerous. Maybe that's why I love the honesty of the Bible. God never pretends that trust is easy. He doesn't shame people for struggling. He patiently teaches them. And when I started reading the Bible, I noticed something I'd never seen before. Abraham had to learn to trust God. Moses had to learn to trust God. David had to learn to trust God. The disciples, they had to learn to trust God. Even after watching Jesus perform miracle after miracle, there were moments when they were still afraid. Jesus didn't walk away from them. He stayed with them. He kept teaching them. He kept showing them who he was. And that's when something finally clicked for me. God wasn't asking me to manufacture trust. He was inviting me to get to know him. It's a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Because the more I know him, the more I discover that he's nothing at all like the people that let me down. He's faithful, and he keeps his promises, and he never leaves, and he never changes, and he never stops loving the children, his children. I've learned something over the years. Trust isn't built because someone tells you to trust. Trust is built because someone proves over and over again that they can be trusted. And that's exactly what God has been doing in my life. Now, can I leave you with a couple of questions? These are not questions for me to answer. These are questions for you to write down in your notebook if you have one, and just meditate on them. That's what I did on my first journey. I'm telling you, it helps. It works. So ask yourself, who taught me to trust? Who taught me what trust looks like? Was it someone who kept their promises, or was it someone who broke them? Just be honest. And 2, have I been judging God's character by what people have done to me, or by what God's word says about him? It's a great question. And 3, where's God asking me to trust him today? Not 5 years from now, not 10 years from now, today, just today. And then if you're looking for somewhere to spend some time with God this week, please write down these verses. I'd encourage you to read them slowly. Don't rush through them. Just ask yourself, what do these verses teach me about God's character? The first one is Psalm 56, especially verse 3. When I'm afraid, I put my trust in you. Notice, David didn't hide his fear. He brought it to God. And then read Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Read it again, but this time don't hear it as a command. Hear it as an invitation. And then my favorite, Isaiah 41:10. Read every promise in those two verses. And notice how many times God says, I will. He doesn't say you better. He says, I will. And then John 10, 27 through 30. If you read that, read what he says about his sheep, especially these words. No one will snatch them out of my hand. I smile every time I read that because every time I think I hear Mike, I got you. Hey, next week, I want to talk about two words that have changed the way I see God, and that is grace and mercy. If you're anything like me, you probably heard those words your whole life. But I wonder, have we really stopped to think about the difference? What is grace and what is mercy? And why does understanding these two words change everything? Hey, look, I'm excited about this series. I hope you are, and I can't wait to share that with you next week. I'll be here, and I hope you are.